Welcome to the Fair Elections webinar replay. This is the legislative update, and also we'll be discussing what's coming up next in the courts. And indeed, the courts will play a really key role in the progress of legislation. They will be determining what are the rules for redistricting going forward, potentially, and also whether we will have redrawings of our very own here in North Carolina. So the first thing we expect is for the Supreme Court ruling to come down at the end of June. Then in July, mid-July, we will have the first hearing of the Common Cause v. Lewis case, which is in North Carolina court and is addressing the legislative districts. We may also, depending on how the Supreme Court rules, we may also at that point get a ruling from the Middle District Court, the Federal Middle District Court, requiring and specifying how the redrawing will take place if, in fact, the Supreme Court orders a redrawing. And they could do that even if without issuing a broader ruling on the basis that our map is one of the most extreme gerrymanders ever drawn. And then we would hope to get some kind of a ruling in the Common Cause case, which will go to the North Carolina Supreme Court towards the end of the year. I'm not really, don't have really any idea when that would take place, but ideally it would be towards the end of the year. Then the NCGA is the next thing to consider. The legislative clock is ticking, but it's just about to, the alarm is about to go off. They're just about to close down this session. Once they approve the budget, which will probably be towards the end of June, they will wrap things up until the short session after next spring. It now looks unlikely there'll be action until that short session, and that could include either regular legislation or a constitutional amendment. So the long session will end, as I say, probably in July, then or early July. Then we could have special sessions. There will definitely be a special session if they're ordered to redraw, and if the court says that the legislature gets the first crack at it. Then there will be the regular short session, which starts in May of the following year. There could be special sessions leading up to the election or after the election, and then the regular long session will start in the next January and end as the current long session in about July. So the real question is whether there will be a redrawing in 2020. The congressional depends on the U.S. Supreme Court, and the legislative depends on the North Carolina Supreme Court. So sort of like, so you can think of that as the state level is being handled, the federal level is being handled by the feds, and the state map currently being handled by the North Carolina court. So then we have the elections. We currently have the municipal elections, but it's important to note that the court cases could affect election timing. They have the ability to do that, to change the filing, the primary, or though it's very unlikely to change the timing of the general election. But assuming that that doesn't happen, or doesn't it's definitely not certain to happen, we'll have the municipal election in September. Then in December, we're expecting to have the filing for 2020, and that's for everybody running, legislature and so forth, the Senate, all the other seats. There will be a primary in March, unless it is postponed by the court. And there could also be, consideration of a constitutional amendment on the spring ballot, but that's pretty unlikely at this point. It is more likely, although by far from a done deal, that we will have a constitutional amendment on the general election ballot, which of course is in November. But all of this craziness is actually good news for us because it gives us more time to move the dial. We really need to build public support, especially in conservative areas, in support of redistricting, if we're going to get reform done. And this should be done in time to affect the 2021 redrawing, which is our real deadline. So you can see down there, I've highlighted public education as an area where you can make a difference. We need to get ordinary citizens out there, especially unaffiliated and conservative voters, from the current situation of, gerrymandering, what? All the way to, this is really bad, no way, and they want reform and they want it done now. So moving the dial is the most important thing that we can do, and that will pave the way for a good redistricting in 2020, and we also need to be ready to try to support a redistricting if it happens earlier than that, a special redistricting ordered by the courts, and we'll just have to see if that happens. Now, legislation has indeed been appearing. We have 7 bills that have been introduced. They're as a group, they're pretty good. They have a lot of good features. We don't know where they're going. They're not going much of anywhere this session, it looks like. We begin with H69 that was introduced by the Coalition for Lobbying and Good Government Reform. I think I have that slightly wrong. I never get their title right, which is effectively part of Common Cause, and that is sponsored by Representatives Reeves and LaGrady. It's not a constitutional amendment, but it has bipartisan support. The next one, H140, is the Ross McGrady Commission, North Carolinians for Redistricting Reform, the FAIR Act. That is a constitutional amendment, and it also has bipartisan support. Then we have Fix Our Democracy, which has both a House and a Senate version, and sponsored only by Democrats, however. It has a good redistricting plan, but is probably not going anywhere. Then we have a very interesting bill, H648, introduced by Representatives Warren and Martin, as well as others, and that is the NC Fair State and Congressional Districts Bill. It's not a constitutional amendment, and it does have bipartisan support. And it calls for a commission to be created and to supervise a special master who draws the maps, which are then taken to, given to the legislature to vote on. But the interesting thing there is, in addition to those somewhat unusual provisions, is that the legislature can also consider other maps coming from other sources. But it's a very creative bill, and it could potentially go somewhere with bipartisan support. Then we have finally two more bills that have only Democratic support. These were intended to be companion bills, but the House bill emerged somewhat differently from the Senate bill, and it's really the Senate bill that is the full gold standard. That is a constitutional amendment, but it has only Democrats and is probably not going anyplace either. So here is a chart showing the different bills. I'm not going to go through these, but I've tried to break them down pretty much following our five principles for reasonable redistricting. There you can see that there are commissions in some and not in others in terms of who approves the maps. But in general, they have pretty good criteria and process. So I feel that we're making some progress in getting serious bills being put forward. And I hope that you will stay involved. And thank you very much.